Hi everybody, my name is Craig Hamilton. I'm the lead pastor here at Church 242. And I just want to take this moment and really honestly just apologize to all of you guys that have been following us on our Vimeo account and following us online. The last 5 weeks, we have had some technical difficulties, which means human error, which allowed us basically not to be able to show videos to you guys. And so I just want to say I'm sorry for that, and I apologize to that. I'm pretty sure we have figured out how to correct it all. And so from here on out, you should be able to still follow us on Vimeo and all of our online stuff. It should all be good, and that's kind of a promise to you. That's going to be one of our focuses for 2015, is to make sure that you guys can see what we're doing. And with that, I don't want you guys to be left out in the cold about what we've been talking about. So this video is going to recap, give basically the cliff notes of the last 5 sermons that we've given at Church 242. And so with that said, let's just start right in and go from there. The first one that you guys missed was December 14th. And on December 14th, basically what we talked about was the Magi, and having the Magi showing up into Israel and what that did with King Herod and how that all went down. And so the real quick synopsis of that entire message was basically explaining that the Magi just wasn't 3 guys, but the Magi would have been a group of people, a posse of people, maybe dozens, if not maybe less than 100 these men showing up. And who were they? Very simple. They were men of wisdom, men that followed astrology, men that followed all the different types of religions. And basically, when they saw the star rise, they knew something was different, and they knew the stories that were about the coming king. And so as soon as they saw it, they went to the place where it was supposed to happen, and that was Israel. The problem was King Herod and none of the leaders there knew what the star meant. We had to have somebody outside our very own religion, or outside our very own faith, kind of basically come and tell us, hey, something's happening in your faith. Something's happening big in your religion. You might want to take a look at this. And this is what is frustrating to us, because here was the takeaway of all of that. See, many of us call ourselves Christ followers, but the reality is we don't know what we truly believe. We take what pastors say are people that are trusted on pulpits, and we listen to them. But the reality is sometimes they are misguided, and sometimes they don't speak right, if you will. And what happens is we start believing something that's not true. Like there were 3 wise men, and the only reason why we get 3 wise men or 3 kings is because there were 3 gifts. There were 3 gifts that were given, and that is very true, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there was only 3 of them. And it goes on even further. You know, we talked about the honor and shame culture as well, and we talked about Mary and Joseph living in this honor and shame society. Well, when you get to it, when they go to the house to show up, or when they go to the house in Bethlehem, and they said there's no room for them in the inn, it's not technically an inn. The reality of it is that it's a house that maybe had an upper room or something like that. And the reality is, with that, it probably was family. And the family might have been shamed. And if the family was shamed, what they were saying to Mary and Joseph was, away from us, we don't like you. We're not accepting what it is. Now, it doesn't say that they didn't find another house. It just says the first house that they went to. So when it also says that there was nowhere to lay Jesus' head, so they had to find a manger. The reality is, when we think of manger, we know mangers is like a trough and it feeds animals. So the number one thing that we assume is that they were living or staying in a barn or a stable. And the reality for that is it's probably not the truth. And another reality of that that we talked about is very simple, is if Mary was having a baby, Joseph couldn't be involved in that. So did Mary have Jesus by herself? And the reality of that is no. And so what we really wanted to hammer home is this, is what do you really believe? What are you following your faith? Are you personally reading the scriptures to get what God wants you to get? Or are we just listening to people? And the people that we listen to, are they giving the right information? And I know this is a lot to take in, and like I said, this was the Cliff Notes version of that sermon. But the biggest thing is this: recognize what God is doing. Recognize what God is doing in your life and in your community. Because it's not just about you, it's about the community of people. Recognize what God is doing. So if a star shows up in the heavens, we know what God is about to do. And next, make sure that you personally are reading the scriptures for yourself. Get it for yourself. And that was December 14th. Now we're going to jump. Here we go. December 21st, okay? It was right before our Christmas Eve service. Everybody was busy getting like gifts together, and the Lord spoke to me on December 21st that morning, and I had this whole like message set up to talk about Mary and Joseph and honor and shame, but I had to throw that all out because the Lord really told me to talk about Malachi. And Malachi is the last prophet that wrote about God before he takes off. Basically, when I say take off, God takes a break. For 400 years, and in theology we call it the 400 years of silence. There are no prophets that wrote during that time. The Israel went through a lot of changes during that time. Some battles with Syrians and Persians and Romans and Greeks and all these things start taking place in Israel. But God stays silent. And the whole reason why the Lord told me to talk on Malachi is because in Malachi chapter 4, this is the last chapter right before it ends. It's the last chapter before the New Testament. It basically states that there is one that is coming. But see, when theology talks about the 400 years of silence, it kind of frustrates me, and it gets to me because I just don't believe our God was silent. I don't believe that God wasn't doing anything. That's kind of like God ignoring us, and just being like, well, whatever, and gone. And that's not what happened. See, I don't believe that at all. See, when I read history during that time period, and I read what was actually taking place during that time, this is amazing. See, between Malachi and Matthew in the Bible, there is like a span of 400 years. But within that 400 years, within that time period, you have one of the most technologically advanced times in history, with tools and ships and roads. Matter of fact, they created this road called the Roman road, and it was this huge road that basically that stretched that went all over. It went all over. I mean, from Egypt all the way. Anyways, needless to say, I don't have to get into all of that. But the reality is when we looked at this, it's not the 400 years of silence. It was the 400 years of preparation. See, if God was going to come off of his throne and come down into the world, he needed a way to get his message to everyone. He needed a way to get his love to everyone, his grace, his mercy. He needed ways to spread that, not just in a small section, but across the entire world. And that could have never taken place. Never taken place. If it wasn't for the advances that took place in that 400 years. So when we say it's the 400 years of silence and God just like being quiet and not talking and there's nothing written, I disagree. I think it's the 400 years of preparation, because God was about to do one of the greatest things he's ever done in the entire world. And the way that we related this is this. Why would we talk about this right before Christmas? Because of this. What is God doing in your life? You're right. You might be silent and you might be praying and on your knees and there is nothing going on for you. You might be sitting there saying, I'm yelling for God to do something in my life and I just don't hear him. And you feel like you're in silence. But the reality is you're not in silence. I believe that God is preparing something for you. See, we need to learn not to get frustrated with the silence, but get excited for what God is doing. See, we have to have patience in the preparation because God's about to do something big. And so for that December 21st, that's exactly what we talked about. What is God preparing for you? If you believe God is silent and God isn't moving, what is he preparing for you? And the next thing we did was December 24th. We had our very first Christmas Eve service. And I'll be honest with you, it was awesome for us as the staff. I remember sitting in this room where we're filming this right now, and there was 18 of us, and we said, man, what would God do? And when we were sitting there on Christmas Eve, all together, we were outside, the lights were on, it looked really pretty, it was cold, thank God it was cold. We did the candles, and we had the candlelight service, and it was amazing just to look out over everybody and just see that we are the light of the world. We are those little flames. Why? Not because we're God. No, because God is in us. And if God is in us, then our flame connected to somebody else's flame becomes a great blaze. And I am super excited to see what God wants to do with the blaze that is coming from this community. Recap of what we talked about Christmas Eve is basically this. We get that Christmas is a pagan thing. We have a lot of pagan traditions pushed together into one thing. But out of everything, and it doesn't matter who you are, what faith you have, what religion you are, none of that matters at this point on December 25th. And the reason why it doesn't matter is because Jesus was and is real. You can't disprove that. He really was flesh and blood. He was a man. Now, you get to decide if he was a liar, a lunatic, or if he was the Lord. Those are your things to decide. See, that's your faith. But what you cannot debate and what you cannot fight over is that he was real. And because he was real, we celebrate him. Now, here's the next part of this whole thing. December 25th obviously might not be the exact time that Jesus was born, but that's the day that we choose to celebrate it. And so this is the cool part that we said, is that we will remember him. We will remember him. See, no matter what you think of Christianity or church or anything like that, it's always taken back to this man. And this man has changed the world. And for me and my heart and my belief, he is and always will be the Lord. And so with that, not only did we do our very first Christmas Eve service, we also did our very first communion as a church to remember who Christ truly is. And that was a very fun night. If you were there, thanks for being there. If you missed it, I'm sorry. Maybe next year. We're going to move forward now. December 28th. You know, it's that awkward week right between Christmas and New Year's. And we had a great conversation about the wedding at Canaan. And basically it was John chapter 2. And we gave this idea of what miracles are we missing. See, the wedding at Canaan is that story where Jesus' mother is at this wedding. Jesus and all of his disciples are there. And as they're at this wedding, they run out of wine. Now, a party and a wedding on this magnitude in an honor-shame culture is huge. And you always want to respect all the people that are there because of the honor-shame society. Running out of wine would have been one of the most disrespectful things you could possibly do. One of the most disrespectful things you could possibly do. So, what happens? Mary steps up and says, Jesus, do something. Do something. And Jesus says these amazing words. He says, it is not yet my time. And I think sometimes we miss that, because what happens is, what he's saying is this: if I do this miracle publicly right now, it will start the road to the cross. And most people just think that Jesus can walk around and do whatever miracles he wanted to do, but it wasn't. See, when he started to publicly do the miracles, it was going to open a door that would ultimately lead him to his sacrifice. And so Mary, not understanding this, looks at these servants and he says, do whatever he tells you to do. And sure enough, Jesus looks at him and he says, you see those ceremonial washing basins? He says, fill them up. And so they filled them up to the brim, it says. See, sometimes when God asks us to do things, we only do things basically what they half-asked, A-S-K-E-D. Whatever he asks us to do, we sometimes do it, but half-heartedly or not to the full. And what happens is it takes away from the miracle that's about to take place. And so these servants, because they were told to do exactly what he says, they fill it up to basically overflowing. That means the water level was just, it was right at the top of these basins. And it holds 20 to 30 gallons of water. Okay, which means out of the 6 basins that were there, I think it could hold like over 800 bottles of our wine today. It would hold over 800 bottles of wine. So anyways, they get this water and they're standing there, and then Jesus says, and now this is the thing, take the water and go. Give it to the master of the ceremony. Now what the servant is hearing during this time frame is not go and give wine. He's hearing go and give water. This is basically a death sentence. This is what it is. You are going to go and shame the master of the ceremony, basically probably the father, in front of everybody. You're going to hand him water when he asks for wine, and then all of a sudden, not only are you going to shame him with water, then all of a sudden everybody's going to realize, oh my God, they ran out of wine. And now not only is he going to be shamed, his whole family's going to be shamed, and who knows how that's going to affect the marriage. There is not just, hey, go give somebody some water and watch me do something cool. This has never been done before. So basically the servants are sitting there going, we are going to die. That's what we're going to do. We are being led to our death. But something in them said, we've got to do this. So I can imagine then they were probably nervous, shaking as they have water in this cup, and then they hand it to the master of the ceremony, and I just envision them handing this cup over to the master of the ceremony and then turning away like, oh, he's gonna hit me. Oh, this is gonna be horrible. How's he going to kill me? And here's the thing, when you actually read the scriptures, it doesn't say that there was wine in the cup. No, it says that the water turned to wine when it hit his lips, when he tasted it. So it's water, 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 wine. And now here's the servants. When he pulls away the cup and he says, this is the best wine. Could you imagine the servants looking like shame, like, oh no, to, excuse me? What? And just the amazement that A, I'm not going to die, but B, who is this man? And the reason why we talked about this is because we're talking about 2015. We're talking about moving forward in our life. And the reality is what miracles are we missing because we don't want to follow God? I think it's time for us to start to dream again in 2015. Dream big. But not just dream big for our own selfish ambition, no, but to really dream and say, God, what are you asking us to do? What do I need to follow? How do I need to follow you? And what does that look like to follow you? Not just here and there, but fully. When he says fill the water, are you going to fill it to the brim in 2015? When God asks you to do something that is absolutely insane, that may make you lose your job or make you look silly in front of your friends, will you be willing to do it? Are you ready to dream in 2015? Are you ready to follow God's word to a T? And that led us into January 4th, which was last week. And once again, I apologize that we once again messed it up for you guys not to see the real version of it. But this is what we talked about. See, we took this sermon where Jesus is, this is from, I'll apologize. This is from Mark chapter 5 or Luke chapter 8. And basically the idea of it was this. We looked at this one woman. This one woman in Mark chapter 5 and Luke chapter 8 that has been subject to bleeding for 12 years. 12 years. Now the important part about what you need to know about this woman is that, see, in the Levitical law, or the Mosaic law that you find in Leviticus, and I'm pretty sure it's found in Leviticus 15, you're going to find these laws that when women are on their monthly or their menstrual cycle, and I apologize if that was too much for you, but basically when they're on their period, this is what happens, is they are unclean for 7 days until it stops. And now listen, not just are they personally unclean, but anything that they touch is unclean. Any like if they sat down on a stool or on a piece of carpet or whatever, that is unclean and it must be washed over and over again. And then it goes on to tell us in Leviticus that not only is it for those 7 days, but what has to happen for you, let's say personally you touch them, then you have to wash, you have to bathe, your clothes have to be bathed, and you are still unclean until the very next day. And so you have this woman that basically anything she touches and any person she touches is completely unclean. And she's basically an outcast. And in the story, Jesus comes up on shore. And these crowds start to flood around him. These crowds start to go around him. And the first guy that he sees is this man named Jairus. And Jairus is basically a pastor of a synagogue. And basically he says, my daughter is dying. Will you help me? And Jesus says, absolutely. And he starts walking. And as he starts walking through the town, more and more people start to crowd around. And it starts to get really packed. I believe the disciples at this point start to become bodyguards, trying to push people away. People are reaching in and they're grabbing and they're trying to get a hold of Jesus. And all of a sudden, and I love this part of it, all of a sudden, everybody just stops. Everybody just stops. Or not everybody, but Jesus, he just stops. And he says, who touched me? And I love it because at that moment, like Peter turns around and he's just like, everybody's touching you. What do you mean? Who touched you? Everybody's touching you, Jesus. Because I imagine the crowds reaching in, almost like blindfolded, just reaching in, trying to get a piece of Jesus and like, pray for me, Jesus. Touch me, Jesus. And all of a sudden he stops. Why? Because there's this one woman that basically doesn't reach upwards for Jesus, but reaches below. See, what she went for was the hem of his garment. Basically, what this is called the kanaf. And if you had a prayer shawl, this prayer shawl would be designed. It would have all these fringes or tassels on it. And the tassels are called the sheetzi. And basically in a prayer shawl for a Jewish or Hebrew person, the idea becomes this, is you would wear this and it would remind you of the 613 laws, Mosaic laws that you were supposed to follow. And on each end, the four corners of this prayer shawl would have these tassels, these sheetzi as they would call them, and they would also be known as the kanaf. And in the kanaf, they would have these strands, and they're knotted together in a certain way that really honestly spells out the name of God. And that's a whole different sermon. But the reality is there's something special about the kanaf. See, the wings of this is, and that's what it's actually actually, that's the Hebrew word for it, is wings are basically the fringes of a garment. So you have the fringes of a garment, or you have the kanaf. And now you actually find this in Numbers. I think it's Numbers chapter 15. And in Numbers chapter 15, it talks about this prayer shawl that they're supposed to wear. And every Jewish male, even woman, would wear these prayer shawls. Now, you've heard about a prayer closet. Well, a prayer closet isn't just you going home into your closet and shutting the door. No, a prayer closet would be actually when they would take the prayer shawl and put it over their face. And when you did that, you were basically saying, I'm praying, don't bother me. And the Pharisees, now this is where Jesus gets crazy with the Pharisees. See, they would actually make these tassels, these kanafs, they would make them flow out from behind them in a mighty way, and they would take their hats and they would make sure that people knew that it was over their face and not to bother them because they're praying constantly. And this is like the showmanship, but either way, Jesus is there. He is a Jewish man, and therefore we know for a fact Jesus was wearing a prayer shawl or a sheetzee, and on that sheetzee would be the tassels or the kanaf, the wings. And so when it says that when she reached up and she grabbed the hem of his garment, it says she was healed. But it's not just the hem of his garment. And he says, if it was Hebrew, if it was written in Hebrew, it would have said the kanaf. She would have grabbed his kanaf. Now, why is this important? I love this because I think we miss it when we translate it into the English, because in the English it just says he grabs his clothes. But the word is very specific, and here's why. Because in Malachi chapter 4, verse 2, it says that the Messiah, the Son of Righteousness will come, and there will be healing in his wings. And Malachi is written in Hebrew, and therefore the Hebrew word for wings is kanaf. And so when she reaches in, she's not reaching for his hand, she's not reaching for his prayers, she's not reaching to touch him. All she has to do, if this is who Jesus says that he is, she's reaching in and she's going to grab the wings, the kanaf. And when she does, she is instantly healed. Instantly healed. And I love this about this. Why? Because it shows us that there is a purpose to chasing God. See, I think so many people, we go into church and we go into worship and we go into prayer, and it's kind of like the crowd around Jesus. They're kind of blindly just reaching in and saying, God, touch me. And hopefully at one point their hand will hit Jesus' hand and they'll instantly be healed. But the reality is, God is saying this: there are so many ways to come after me. Do you know what they are? And are you following them? And the reason we discussed this on January 4th, because it was the ultimate question for this new year. How are you chasing God? See, God has designed you in a certain way. He's designed you specifically with certain gifts and talents. And the question is, are you using those gifts and talents? Or I guess a better question is, are you ready to use them? So the whole idea of this message was, in 2015, are you ready to start chasing your destiny? Are you ready to start going after the Lord? But it's not going after him like the crowds where you're just blinded, just swinging after God. No. Are you ready to purposely look at the scriptures and say, this is how we're supposed to follow God? Let's go after him. Are you ready to rise up as a community? And the last thing that we shared was basically, it was Isaiah 58:12. See, as I was praying for this new year, the Lord kept sharing with me Isaiah 58:12, Isaiah 58:12. And the basic idea of Isaiah 58:12 is this: He's called us to basically rebuild the foundations. And that way, when you rebuild the foundations, it says that you will be able to walk into the streets again, proclaiming who he is. And that's what I want us to do us as a community, the small community that is Church 242. I want to take it to the big community that we call Southern California. And I want us to do great things for the Lord in Southern California. How do you do that? Simple. Just be you. The real you. The one that God created you to be. The one that's not afraid to pray for your friend in the supermarket or the gas station. The one that's not afraid to see somebody struggling and do what you can to help them. The one that looks at the world spectrum and says, oh my gosh, there are dying and starving kids, not only in our backyard, but all over the world. And you step up and you do something about it. Are you ready in 2015? To be able to walk down the street and to be able to proclaim God and not feel ashamed. Because these are the foundations I believe God wants to bring back. So with all that said, those were the 5 messages in a real quick recap. I'm excited to see what God's about to do with us in 2015. Once again, I want to apologize for not being able to show you the real film of all of it. But if you want, you're more than welcome. If you are in our area, you're more than welcome to join us at 9:30 Sunday mornings at Altaloma Junior High. If you can't join us then, my promise to you is to make sure that these videos will be posted online for you. I hope that you had a great and wonderful holiday season. And I hope and I expect God to do great things in your life in 2015. Thank you for being a part of our community. Whether you're right with us and close with us, or if you're in a different country or a different state, we are all together as brothers and sisters in Christ. Much love to all of you guys, and we'll see you guys next week. God bless.